The house smelled like emptiness. Not the clean kind of emptiness, not the kind that comes after you've organized a room or opened a window. This was the emptiness of things that had been taken. The air still held the ghost of her mother's lavender perfume, but the dresser was bare. The closet was open and hollow. Even the small ceramic bowl where her mother used to keep loose change was gone, just a pale circle of dust on the nightstand where it used to sit, like a shadow of something that had mattered. Nadia stood in the doorway of her mother's bedroom and couldn't make herself cross the threshold. 3 days. Her mother had been gone 3 days, and her sisters had moved through this house like a tide, fast, purposeful, and cold. They had come with boxes and husbands and excuses. Mama would have wanted me to have this. You weren't even here for the last 6 months. You always were the difficult one. Nadia had stood in the hallway, watching it happen. Too hollowed out by grief to fight. Too tired to argue over a pearl necklace or a hand-stitched quilt or the small oil painting of a harbor that her mother had loved her entire life. Now the house was stripped. And Nadia was 34 years old, unemployed, sleeping in her childhood bedroom on a bare mattress, with $42 in her bank account. She pressed her back against the doorframe and slid down until she was sitting on the floor. What do I do now, Mama? No answer came. But something would. Something already waiting, patient and silent, just beneath her feet. To understand how Nadia ended up there, you have to understand what the last year had looked like. She had moved back home 11 months earlier, not because she wanted to, but because her mother, Elena, had been diagnosed with early-onset vascular dementia. The disease didn't announce itself dramatically. It arrived like water damage, slowly, quietly, and then all at once. First her mother forgot appointments. Then names. Then she called Nadia by her dead grandmother's name and didn't realize she'd done it. Nadia had been living in Portland at the time, working as a graphic designer for a mid-sized firm, renting a studio apartment she loved, building a quiet life that fit her like a well-worn coat. She had friends. She had a routine. She had, for the first time in her adult life, a kind of peace. She gave it up without much deliberation. She just packed. She gave notice at work. She told her landlord. And she drove 12 hours back to the small lakeside town of Orfield, Ohio, where she had grown up, to take care of a woman who was slowly forgetting who she was. Her sisters, Margot, the eldest, and Diane, the middle, had called it admirable. They sent money twice. They visited for long weekends and left Sunday evenings, hugging Nadia at the door, smelling like their comfortable lives. Margot had a husband, a mortgage, and twin boys in a suburb of Columbus. Diane had a career in real estate and an apartment in Cincinnati she described as finally adult. Neither of them could realistically uproot their lives. Nadia, they reasoned, was the one without the complications. What they meant was, Nadia was the one without enough of a life to lose. She spent 11 months waking at night when her mother cried out. 11 months learning to cook soft foods, managing medications. Sitting through doctor's appointments and insurance phone calls and the particular anguish of watching someone you love become a stranger in their own face. She read to her mother. She played old records. She held her hand during the confused, frightened nights when Elena would look at her with terrified eyes and ask where she was. "You're home, Mama. You're home." She said it so many times it stopped feeling like a sentence and started feeling like a prayer. When Elena died, quietly, in her own bed, on a Tuesday morning in late October, Nadia had been sitting right beside her. She held her hand as it happened. She was the only one in the room. By Thursday, her sisters had arrived. By Saturday, the house had been emptied of everything that could carry meaning. By Monday, Margot had pulled Nadia aside in the kitchen and told her, gently but clearly, that the house itself would need to be sold. We talked to a realtor. The three of us split the proceeds equally, of course. But you'd need to be out in 60 days. Equally. As if equal didn't require equivalence to be just. Nadia had said nothing. She had simply nodded and looked at the linoleum floor and thought, I have nowhere to go. She had no job anymore, she'd freelanced a little during the caregiving year, but nothing stable. Her savings had drained. Her apartment in Portland was long gone. Her friends had been patient, then gently distant, the way people become when your grief becomes a permanent weather system. She was, by every measurable standard, starting from nothing. And she was doing it inside a house that no longer felt like hers, sleeping on a bare mattress, eating canned soup, trying not to look at the pale circles of dust where meaningful things used to be. It was the radiator that started it. Old houses in Ohio do this thing in November, they clank and hiss like living creatures, the pipes expanding with the first cold weeks of the season. Nadia had grown up with the sound. It was one of the few things about the house that felt unchanged, almost comforting in its constancy. On her fourth night alone, the radiator in the back bedroom, her mother's room, started making a sound she didn't recognize. Not the usual clanking. Something more irregular. More hollow. Like knocking from beneath. She ignored it the first night. The second night, she got up. She stood in her mother's doorway with a flashlight and listened. The sound was coming from the corner, near the window, the old iron radiator that had squatted in the same spot for 40 years. She crossed the room and crouched beside it. The noise wasn't coming from the radiator itself. It was coming from the floor. She pressed her hand flat against the floorboards. Old pine, the original boards from when the house was built in the 1940s. She'd never thought about them, they were just the floor. Covered in a thin rug her whole childhood, and now bare since Margot had taken the rug. She ran her flashlight beam along the seam where the radiator met the floor. And she saw it, barely, unless you were looking with a flashlight at the right angle, a seam that didn't match. A rectangular outline in the floorboards, roughly 18 inches by 12. A gap at one edge just wide enough to fit a fingernail. Nadia stared at it for a long moment. She thought, this is an old house. It's probably just a repair patch. Or rot. She thought, don't be dramatic. She thought, Mama. She got a kitchen knife, came back, and worked the blade into the gap. The board lifted, not easily, but it lifted, and beneath it was a shallow space, maybe 6 inches deep, between the floorboards and the subfloor beneath. The kind of space that existed accidentally in old houses, or deliberately, if someone wanted to hide something. Inside, a metal tin, the kind that used to hold Danish butter cookies. Sealed with rubber bands that had dried and cracked with age. And beneath the tin, a small bundle of papers tied with kitchen twine, and something else, a small, cloth-wrapped rectangle that Nadia recognized immediately, even before she unwrapped it. Her hands were shaking when she lifted it out. It was her mother's journal. Not a diary, Elena hadn't been a diary person. A journal. Cream-colored cover, college-ruled pages, her mother's small, careful handwriting filling maybe the first 2/3 of it. The last entry was dated 14 months ago, just before the dementia had made writing too difficult. Nadia sat on the bare floor of her mother's stripped bedroom, in the cold, in the dark, and opened the tin. Inside, cash. Not a fortune, but real. Folded bills, mostly 20s and 50s, and a rubber-banded stack of hundreds at the bottom. She counted it with trembling hands. $4,300. She sat very still for a long time. Then she picked up the journal and read the first line she opened to. Nadia doesn't know what she's worth. That is my greatest regret, that I didn't show her before the fog came. She read the journal in one sitting, cross-legged on the floor with a blanket pulled around her shoulders. The flashlight propped against the baseboard. It wasn't the revelation she might have dreamed of as a child, no dramatic secrets, no hidden inheritance, no scandal. It was something both smaller and more enormous than that. It was her mother, thinking on the page. Thinking about all three daughters, but returning to Nadia again and again with a particular ache. She is the one who gives too much and asks for too little. I don't know how to fix that in her. I should have tried harder. There were practical notes too. The cash had been accumulated over 15 years, a habit Elena had started after Nadia's father left, a small independence fund she called it in one entry. Not for emergencies. For beginnings. I always meant to give it to whoever needed a beginning most. There was a note near the back of the journal, written in slightly shakier handwriting, close to the end. Before the fog fully took her. It said, in full, I hid this because Margot would split it and Diane would spend it and Nadia would give her share away. This belongs to whoever finds it. I think I know who that will be. Nadia wept for a long time after that. Not prettily, the ugly, gasping kind of crying that comes from deep in the chest. The kind that has been waiting. Then she washed her face, made tea, and sat at the kitchen table with the journal and the tin in front of her and tried to think clearly. $4,300. 60 days to leave the house. No job. No apartment. No clear direction. But something had shifted. Not the circumstances, those were still brutal. Something inside her. She opened her laptop and started researching. She had been a graphic designer. She knew brand identity, visual communication, typography. She'd done it for 9 years before caregiving had paused everything. The skills hadn't gone anywhere. But she didn't want to go back to working for someone else, not immediately, not the way she'd been doing it. Something in her had changed during those 11 months of caregiving. She had learned how to be present. How to slow down. How to notice. She wanted to make something that was hers, even if it was small, even if it was hard. She decided to start a freelance brand design practice, built specifically around small local businesses, the kind that couldn't afford agency prices but desperately needed visual identity help. She'd seen enough of them in Orfield and the surrounding towns. The bakery with the clip art logo. The family hardware store with a font from 1987. The women's consignment shop with a hand-lettered sandwich board that broke her heart. The plan was clear in her head. The execution nearly broke her. She spent the first 3 weeks building a portfolio website, which should have taken 4 days. But she was out of practice, distracted by grief, and second-guessing everything. She would finish a page and look at it and think this is mediocre and rebuild it. She'd work until 2 a.m. and wake at 7 feeling like the night had accomplished nothing. She sent cold emails to 11 local businesses in week 4. 3 replied. 2 of those were to say no thank you. 1, a woman named Patrice who ran a home-baked goods business out of her kitchen, said she was interested but had almost no budget. Nadia quoted her $300 for a logo and brand colors. Patrice said yes. The logo took Nadia 9 days and 4 complete restarts. She sent it. Patrice loved it. Nadia looked at what she'd made and felt, for a brief moment, like herself. Then the moment passed and she was still alone in an emptying house with 46 days left and $300 added to her dwindling fund. She started attending a small business group that met Tuesday evenings at the Orfield Community Center, not because she was confident, but because she was desperate for something to structure her days. She was the youngest person there by a decade. She sat quietly the first 2 meetings, listening. On the 3rd meeting, she showed Patrice's brand on her laptop to the group, almost by accident. Someone asked what she did. The room's response surprised her. Not applause. Not awe. Just genuine interest. A man who ran a boat repair shop asked if she did signs. A woman who made custom quilts asked about an Etsy shop header. Small things. But real. She said yes to both and then went home and taught herself what she needed to know to deliver what she'd promised. She wasn't sleeping enough. She was eating badly, rice and canned tomatoes and eggs, cycling through cheap combinations. The house creaked around her at night and she would sometimes lie awake thinking about all the ways this could fail. She'd be 40 by the time she stabilized. She'd burn through her mother's savings and still have nothing. She'd have given up a real career for 11 months of caregiving and then an experiment that didn't work. But every morning she got up and opened the laptop. And some days, that was the whole victory, just, opened the laptop. She kept her mother's journal on the desk beside her. Not to read it constantly, but to remember that someone had believed in her capacity before she believed in it herself. 41 days after she found the tin, with 19 days left in the house, Nadia got an email that changed the shape of everything. It came from a woman named Loretta Shine, who owned a small regional chain of 3 farm-to-table grocery stores in central Ohio. Loretta had heard about Nadia through the boat repair man from the business group. Their families knew each other. She'd looked at Nadia's website. She'd seen the work she'd done for Patrice's baked goods business and 2 others that Nadia had added since. The email was direct: I need a complete rebrand. New logo, packaging design, signage, and a brand guide. I've talked to agencies. Their prices are designed for corporations. Would you be interested in discussing this? Nadia read the email 3 times. Then she did something she had almost never done in her professional life: she didn't immediately undersell herself. She had done it her whole career, quoted low because she was afraid the real number would scare people away, taken less because she didn't want to seem arrogant. Given more than she was paid for because she worried that her work alone wasn't enough justification. Her mother had seen it. She gives too much and asks for too little. She sat with the email for 2 hours. She researched what a project of that scope actually cost. She built out a real estimate: time, deliverables, revisions, a brand guide document. She added what she needed to survive while doing the work. She came to a number that felt, to her old self, terrifyingly high. She sent it. 40 minutes later, Loretta replied, "That's fair. Can we meet this week?" The project was a 4-month engagement. The fee, the real, full fee, was $11,000, paid in 3 installments. Nadia had to put her hand over her mouth when she read the final contract. But here's what mattered: the money wasn't the turning point. The turning point was the email she'd sent with the real number in it. That was the moment something genuinely changed, not in her bank account, but in how she understood her own worth. She had looked at her mother's words and finally heard them not as compliment but as instruction. Ask for what you're worth. Stop making yourself smaller so other people stay comfortable. The Loretta Shine project also did something else: it gave Nadia a reason to stay in Orfield. Margot called during week 6 to confirm the house sale timeline. Nadia told her she needed a few more weeks and offered to pay rent, a small amount, but real. There was a long pause. Margot sighed, consulted with Diane, and agreed. Nadia found a small apartment above a hardware store on the main street of Orfield. It was nothing beautiful. But it was hers. She moved her mattress, her laptop, her mother's journal, the empty tin, she kept it, and 7 boxes of everything she owned. She sat in the middle of the empty apartment on a Saturday morning with sunlight coming through the single window, and she did not feel lonely. She felt like a beginning. The Shine project was the hardest professional thing she'd ever done. It wasn't that the work itself was beyond her capability, it was that she had to do it alone, without colleagues to sanity check her decisions, without the infrastructure of a firm. Without anyone to tell her the direction was right. Every choice landed entirely on her. The logo direction she chose could be wrong. The color palette could feel off to Loretta. The packaging design could sit on a shelf and fail to attract a single person. She made choices anyway. She developed a habit she hadn't had before the caregiving year. She would sit, before starting any major design session, and just observe something. Not her screen. A tree out the window. The grain of the wooden desk she'd found at a thrift store. The way light moved across the wall in the afternoon. She'd spent 11 months paying attention to her mother, to the smallest shifts in her breathing, her expressions, her comfort, and she'd discovered that attention itself was a skill. A creative one. The brand she built for Loretta Shine's stores was rooted in something genuine, the actual landscape of Central Ohio, the actual feeling of an early Saturday morning at a farmer's market. The actual texture of trust between a small producer and a local buyer. Not aspirational stock imagery food branding. Real. Loretta cried a little when Nadia presented it. Not dramatically, she just had to take a moment and look away. "It looks like what I always meant the stores to be," she said. That sentence lived in Nadia for a long time. She was not, after that, an overnight success. Let's be clear about that. She got 2 more projects from Loretta's referrals. Then a dry stretch of 6 weeks with almost nothing. She picked up a few more small local clients. She built her website again, better this time, with real case studies. She went back to the business group on Tuesdays, but now she spoke up, shared things she'd learned, asked honest questions. She also, slowly, rebuilt something she hadn't realized she'd lost, a sense of her own daily rhythm. She cooked real food again, slowly, deliberately, the way her mother had taught her. She started walking in the mornings along the lake at the edge of town, even in December, even when it was 15 degrees and the lake was a sheet of gray ice. She bought a second-hand record player and found 3 of her mother's favorite albums at an estate sale, and she played them on Sunday evenings and let herself feel whatever came. She called Margot once, 3 months after leaving the house. The conversation was careful and slightly formal, the way conversations get when trust has been fractured but you're not quite ready to call it unfixable. Nadia didn't bring up the stripping of the house, the inequality of the caregiving, the casual cruelty of equally. Not yet. She just talked. She told Margot about the business. Margot sounded genuinely surprised, not dismissive surprised, but recalibrating surprised, like someone updating a file they'd thought was closed. She didn't call Diane. Some things take longer. Some things take more than a phone call. Nadia was learning the difference between reconciliation and self-betrayal, and it was a complicated, imperfect education. She did not forgive her sisters quickly. She did not perform forgiveness to seem noble. She let herself be angry for a while, real anger, acknowledged anger, and she did the work of grieving both her mother and the version of her family she'd needed them to be. It was not clean. It was not tidy. It was human. 8 months after finding the tin, Nadia returned to the house. It had been sold, a young couple from Columbus, renovating it. They'd contacted the estate through Margot because they had questions about some of the original construction. Margot, for reasons Nadia still didn't entirely understand, gave them Nadia's number instead. She drove over on a Wednesday afternoon. The outside had already changed, new paint, the old shutters replaced. It looked like someone else's story beginning. The couple, Tom and Rachel, in their late 20s, clearly in love with the project, walked her through the rooms. The walls were stripped to plaster in some places. The kitchen cabinets were gone. It was a different kind of emptiness than the one Nadia had stood in 8 months ago. A constructive emptiness. They led her to the back bedroom. "We found something when we opened up the floor," Tom said. "Under the radiator corner. We wanted to see if you knew anything about it, family history, whatever it might mean." Nadia went still. There was a second compartment. Beneath the one she'd found, beneath the subfloor, in a space she hadn't known to look for, accessible only from below, was another sealed tin. Smaller. And a letter. The letter was in her mother's handwriting, undated, but the hand was steady and clear, written years before the dementia, perhaps decades. Rachel handed it to her gently, like something fragile. Nadia read it standing in the empty room. To whoever finds this, my daughter, a stranger, someone I can't imagine yet, I have been hiding things in this floor for 20 years. Not because I'm secretive. Because I needed to believe that preparation and love could exist in the same gesture. The money upstairs is for starting. This is something different. Inside this tin is a letter of recommendation I wrote for Nadia, my youngest, years ago. I wrote it when she was 22 and already starting to shrink herself. I never gave it to anyone because I didn't know who to address it to. I didn't know who she would need it from. I've also kept, in this tin, every card she ever made me. Every drawing. Every note. From kindergarten through adulthood. The other girls bought things. Nadia made things. She always made things. I don't know if she'll find this. I don't know if she'll need it. But I wanted someone, her, or the stranger who comes after, to know that a woman lived in this house who was loved more thoroughly than she understood. And that love left evidence. You are standing in a room full of invisible evidence. Nadia read it 3 times. Then she looked up at Tom and Rachel, who were watching her with careful expressions, clearly aware they were witnessing something private. She was remarkable, Nadia said. It came out steady, which surprised her. She opened the tin. Inside, the letter of recommendation, addressed to no one, beginning, I am writing on behalf of my daughter, who has not yet learned to write on behalf of herself, and beneath it, bundled in a hair tie, dozens of folded notes and drawings and cards. Her whole childhood, in scraps. The evidence. Nadia asked Tom and Rachel if she could have an hour alone in the room. They said yes without hesitation. She sat on the bare subfloor, in the space where the floorboards had been lifted, and she went through every piece. A crayon drawing of a house, probably this house, made when she was 5 or 6. A Mother's Day card from 2nd grade with a poem that rhymed love with above and glove. A note from her teenage years, Mom, I'm sorry I slammed the door. I love you even when I'm furious. A sketch she'd made in her early 20s of her mother's hands, just the hands, holding a cup of tea, done in pencil, quietly beautiful. She hadn't remembered making half of these. Her mother had kept all of them. In a tin. Under the floor. 4 decades. You are standing in a room full of invisible evidence. Nadia drove back to her apartment as the sun was going down over the lake, turning the water orange and rust and the soft gray of old pewter. She thought about what it means to be loved in ways you can't see. She thought about how her mother had prepared for her, not knowing when or whether she'd need it, just believing that preparation and love could be the same act. That hiding something for someone, keeping it safe, waiting, that was also a form of devotion. Quiet, patient, underground. She thought about the 11 months she'd spent in that house, and how she'd experienced them mostly as loss of her career, her apartment, her social life, her sense of forward motion. But she'd also been receiving something the entire time, without knowing it. She'd been learning to pay attention. She'd been learning to stay. She'd been given proximity to a woman who loved her more thoroughly than she'd understood. She thought about Margot and Diane, who had come with boxes. She did not hate them. She was beginning to understand that people take things when they are afraid, when they are grieving and don't know what to do with grief, so they convert it into possession. She didn't excuse it. But she was starting to see it. She thought about the letter of recommendation that had never been addressed to anyone, and she understood something. Her mother had been waiting for Nadia to become the person who knew where to send it. Not to an employer, not to an institution, but internally. To herself. I am writing on behalf of my daughter, who has not yet learned to write on behalf of herself. Maybe the whole exercise, the hidden money, the journal, the notes, the letter, was not about resources at all. Maybe it was about a woman who saw her daughter clearly, who saw the smallness Nadia made of herself, and who built a cache of evidence against that smallness. Stored it under the floor. Left it where only someone paying close attention would find it. Her mother had trusted her to pay attention. And she had. Nadia parked outside her apartment above the hardware store and sat in the car for a moment with the tin on the passenger seat beside her. She thought about the clients she'd said yes to when she meant no. The ones she'd undercharged because she was afraid. The years she'd spent being the one who was, without complications, which had always been a quiet way of saying she was the one no one worried about enough to protect. She thought about what her business was becoming. Not a career, exactly, something more woven than that. Something that looked like what she actually was, someone who paid attention to what people were trying to say and helped them say it more beautifully. A person who had learned, in the hardest possible classroom, how to be present. She thought, I am not starting over. I am starting from what was always there. She got out of the car. Carried the tin up the narrow stairs. Set it on her desk beside the journal and the empty first tin and the record player. She put on one of her mother's records, a quiet one, piano and strings, and sat at her desk and opened her laptop and began. The people who love us most don't always protect us visibly. Sometimes love is a tin beneath the floor, patient, hidden, accumulating quietly in the dark, waiting for the moment you finally think to look down. The question is, how many things have been left for you that you haven't knelt down to find yet? And who believed in you long before you believed in yourself?